All right, cool. Hey, I've got Phil and Chad here with me today, and we're going to go through a demo of the static web app CLI. As a team, we've been working for the last couple of weeks on a couple of different Blazor apps that we're deploying as static web apps. They've got an Azure Function app sitting behind the scenes, serving as the API. And one of the challenges we ran into was debugging these applications and kind of what the end-to-end story looks like locally. And that's including using the function as the API piece, the auth piece. And Phil was able to find this static web app CLI project, which I've got pulled up on my screen right now, the documentation for it. And through a little bit of trial and error, we were able to get this up and working, and we wanted to give a quick demo of what that looks like. So first and foremost, I'm not going to go through the documentation of this, but it is an NPM package that can either be run specific to your project or installed globally. I've already got that installed globally. So I'm going to go over to Visual Studio Code and just kind of run through the initialize piece of it. So you can initialize it just by typing the command SWA, which runs through SWA init and recommends a configuration name, kind of looks at your project and recommends a few configuration values. It sees the app location based on the Blazor app, the output location of it, the API location. And I'm just going to go ahead and say, yes, I want those settings. And it's going to run a build command now and build all of this and output it to the correct directories. And once that happens, we'll continue on. But while we're waiting on that, I'm going to pop back over to the web browser. And basically, what's going to happen is this CLI spins up a proxy server for us running on port 4280 that intercepts requests and routes them to the correct place. So it's going to take requests for static assets and route them to the app server or front end server. It's going to take auth requests and route them to a little proxy authentication server and API requests and route them over to our function app that's serving as our API. You can see a little bit of documentation on that down here. And what's really neat about this is it works on all of, or maybe not all, but a lot of the different technologies that you can deploy static web apps on. So we're going to show the Blazor use case here, but you can also do this with React, Angular, probably Vue, JS, and there's even documentation for Vanilla JS on this as well. So it looks like we're still in the build process.
One question, Dave. If we flip back to that graphic. So the API request this supports both kind of the bring your own and the built-in APIs. So either, whether it's hosted by them, managed, I guess is the better word for it, or the bring your own. We'll show those requests. Have we validated that?
I've not tried. I've only tried it with the managed APIs so far. From the documentation, it looks like it would support the bring your own API as well. Nice. But basically what it's doing is it's looking for anything with /API and then routing it to whatever API you're specifying.
Gotcha.
So as long as that can understand that specific routing, I think you'd probably be good to go. Like I said, this initial build takes a couple of minutes. I had already had this initted, but I wanted to kind of show what the process and the initial output of it looks like for the purpose of this video.
So there's some pretty decent documentation there on the project site about like the different parameter or command line parameter options that you can use when you're starting up. If you want different options to be available for authentication, the auth emulator and stuff, so you can, test everything out before you have to publish it out to the static web app.
Yeah, and while we're waiting on this, some good information too is, as I mentioned, this is a Node.js package that we had to install, and Phil and I spent a little bit of time trying to debug this. I'm going to go ahead and cancel because it was trying to deploy, so I don't really want it to deploy out to Azure at the moment. Phil and I spent a little bit of time trying to debug this last week when we were first trying to get it up and running, and we ran into a couple of minor issues. One of them I found, and there is an open issue on GitHub for this at the time of recording, is that it does not work with Node 18. So if you're using Node 18, you need to downgrade to like version 16.6 LTS. So once I did that, it definitely helped and made things working. Another issue, now that this a init file has been generated, is if you've got this app dev server URL specified in here, it does not work at all. It doesn't properly spin up the proxy server, at least for Blazor. So I have to remove that that URL, and then I'll show another like minor quirk here in just a second after I delete that. So now that we've got this file, so this is what was generated by running that SWA init command. Now that I've got this file, I can just go to my command line, sorry about that, and just do SWA start. And it's going to run through, looks like I might already have it up and running someplace else, so give me just a second. Yep, that was it. It
looks like we could use the option though, if you needed to run it on a different port as well. Which it looks like you might have to do since something is hanging on to that other one.
So let's do that. And we'll just do port 4281 for this and see if it works. So what it'll do is start up the function project, start up the API or the UI project. And another issue that I've found is when you're accessing it through the web, you do have to run it on that proxy port for everything to work as you expect, but it launches the Blazor app on whatever it's configured in your launch config there. So I'm going to change that to 4281, and now it's going through the proxy. So this is where we get a lot of really neat things going on. So I'm going to log out really quick to show what that story looks like. So one of the neat things about this proxy is it actually can simulate your authentication. So I can do a sign in with Azure AD. It gives me like a sample Azure AD thing. I can add the roles that I want to do. I could have also done this with GitHub. So I'm just going to put my username on there and log in. And now it's completely simulating the logged in experience for this. And then I can go to one of our pages that hits an endpoint and just do submit on here. And we'll see it's calling our text analytics proxy. You can see that it hit localhost 4281. So that's our proxy port. And then it's hitting that text analytics function. So this is completely letting us do like an end-to-end experience of testing our app locally. Now, what we're not getting right here is the ability to debug. So that's going to be the next piece that I want to show really quick. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and head in here and stop this. And the way I've kind of figured out the debugging experience is to go over to Visual Studio, and I've got a configuration where I'm running both the API and UI locally. So I just start them both at the same time. And that'll take just a second to build and run. And just to kind of prove that we're doing this, I'm going to throw a breakpoint into the function app on our return right here. That's spinning up a new window. And one of my startup options, if you'll bear with me for just a second while I go grab this, is rather than just saying SWA start, I can say SWA start, and I can paste, or I can add in a URL of where the UI is, and then an API location URL. And then I'm going to go ahead and do that -- port again, because again, something has hijacked my port 4280 for the time being that this runs on by default. So what it's going to do is, rather than starting those projects up based on this configuration file, it's going to assume that those two projects are already up and running someplace, which they are in my Visual Studio debugger. And I can just go ahead and click on this. Again, I'm still logged in and everything. I'm going to submit my text, and we'll say Tylenol for our type, and go ahead and hit that. And ideally, that just hit my breakpoint in my Azure Function App debugger that I'm hitting right here. So I can see that's all up and working locally. Go ahead and hit F5 to continue. Go back over. So that went over to my next screen. And then maybe we can put a breakpoint on our validate page as well. Just do on the handle submit, and we can just kind of prove that it's debugging the Blazor app. as well. Here, I think that actually already, that might not be wired up. Let's go to this page, submit text. Nope. Well, it did not pick up the Blazor app, but that might be because of my configuration. But anyway, we can kind of see how all of this works together, and you can get a lot more done locally than we were able to previously, or than we previously thought we were able to do with these static web apps. Any questions, guys?
None on my side.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really cool too, where you can start it up in Visual Studio and then just point the proxy at already running applications locally. That's pretty slick.
Yeah, and I thought one of the other neat things that you get when you are doing that, if you pop back over to the terminal in VS Code where I'd started that up, you can actually see all of the requests that are being made across the wire. So you're going to, and any place where your application's doing any type of logging, you're going to see it in here. So I think it definitely makes the story for these static web apps a lot better, and definitely makes the developer experience a lot better. And I'm all about the better developer experience here. So this is something that I'm definitely going to keep an eye on and be using going forward as we develop more and more of these, whether they be React or Blazor apps as static web apps.
So on the auth flow, you mentioned simulate. Is it actually going through to AD and back, or is it?
It is not.
Okay.
It is. Yeah, it is simulating it. Yeah. So if I log out here, and I think that's where it's really neat in my opinion, right? Is it's letting me, I can give it whatever I want for a user ID. I can give it whatever I want for my roles, for my claims. So I can really test a lot of different situations here. And I think the auth flow actually is one of the places where this really shines, because that's something that's really difficult to test with the actual Azure AD implementation. If I want to have a user with different claims and see how my application reacts to that, etc.
That's awesome. Powerful.
Very, very powerful. Yeah. And once I do log in here, we get the same experience that we have with the static web app, where I can do I think it's .auth/me, and I'll see my client principal, and there, all that's being served up through the proxy server based on that kind of mock login that it gave us.
Nice.
So yeah, so I think that's a really powerful option there.
Very cool.
That's cool. Thanks for demonstrating that, Dave.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining me today. And I think that's all we have for today.